Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schrader, and today we have someone, a high up executive with FranklinCovey. FranklinCovey. And if you've heard of the name Stephen Covey, that's where FranklinCovey comes from. Stephen Covey was the number one global best-selling author of the highly acclaimed book, a book that actually changed my life, and that's why we brought this guest on the show, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. His name is Todd Davis. Todd Davis is the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer of FranklinCovey, and may Stephen Covey rest in peace. But Todd Davis is also the Wall Street Journal best-selling co-author of another book called Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. So Todd Davis, thanks for coming on the Work From Home Show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and the reason I want to talk a little bit about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and how it's so relevant to working from home. I personally, when I started working from home in 2013, it was a transition that was difficult to make because I felt lonely. I was single in my mid-20s at the time. I all of a sudden found that I had just so much free time, so much extra time. And I discovered 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and took notes while reading the book and implemented a lot of the strategies when it comes to mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional health and well-being, implemented it into my daily routine. So 7.5 years later, it's just now a part of who I am. Going out and exercising is that's a part. It's like breathing to me. Exercising my brain and mentally stimulating myself through either chess or writing. It's just a part of it. It's not even like on the schedule anymore. It's just a part of my everyday life, and it's changed my productivity. It's changed my relationships with people. It's made me a better time manager. It's just, I think I have several copies of the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I always, whenever I do podcast interviews or I'm interviewed by the media, I always say the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and my religious scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, those 2 books are the 2 books that changed my life. So again, thanks for the work that you do at FranklinCovey and for spreading the good word of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Well, that is quite an endorsement, and it's certainly been my privilege and pleasure to be with the FranklinCovey organization for, I'm going on 25 years now that I've been with them. I first joined what was called the Covey Leadership Center, which Stephen R. Covey started, as you mentioned, and then we merged with Franklin Quest about a few years after I had joined. And the book that you're referencing it was written 30 years ago. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary. And it is, as you've articulated, it is as relevant, if not more so today, than it was 30 years ago when Stephen first wrote about it. And it's because it is based on principles of effectiveness, principles that were at work and true, for thousands of years before he ever wrote about them, and that will be true, going forward thousands of years. It named one of the best business books of all time, and still, it's quite amazing. And I'm not here to plug the book, but just to say, it has sold over 40 million copies in approximately 50 languages. We still sell about 2,000 to 3,000 copies of the book each week. And so, New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller and all those, they have their criteria. They can't leave books on forever, even though they continue to meet all the criteria, because they've got to make room for other best-selling books. But if that weren't true, it would still remain at the top of those best-selling lists today, for all the reasons you've talked about.
Can you just briefly go over, for those people who aren't familiar with it, can you just briefly touch on what the seven are?
Absolutely. So the 7 habits, they build on each other. They build in order. Habit number 1 is to be proactive. This is the habit of choice. This is the habit that says, I'm not going to allow outside people or circumstances to determine the course of my day or my life. I can be proactive. I'm the captain of my own ship. Habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. This is the habit of vision. This is the habit of starting out my day, my week, my life with a plan, with a blueprint, so to speak, so that I don't just become this reactive person reacting to whatever, urgency or whim comes my way, but that I actually have a plan that doesn't always go perfectly, but that I have to come back to as I get, thrown off course there. That's habit number 2. Habit number 3 is to put first things first. This is the habit of execution, of prioritization. So if habit 1, be proactive, I'm the captain of my ship. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind. I chart my course. Well, habit 3, put first things first. I got to set sail. I got to take action. Henry Ford said, you can't build a reputation on what you say you're going to do. So habit 3 is all about taking action. These first 3 habits of the 7 habits help us accomplish what we call the private victory, or the victory over self-mastery. It's where we have integrity. We do what we say we're going to do. And when we start to master those 3 habits, then we're ready to move up to the next 3 habits, which are all around what's called the public victory. Habit number 4 is to think win-win. This is the habit of mutual benefit. It's the attitude or the spirit with which we go into our relationships, where we realize there's plenty out there and more to spare, versus the more I get, the less there is for you. We think win-lose. So habit number 4 is to think win-win. It's the habit of abundance and the habit of mutual benefit. Habit number 5 is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. This is the habit of mutual understanding. Say it one more time. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This is where we learn how we are have much more influence with others if we take time to truly understand them first. And then habit number 6 is to synergize. This is the habit of creative collaboration, where 1 + 1 = 3 or 10 or 1,000. If we really have this win-win mindset, if we really take time to understand the other person's perspective, then we're in a position to really synergize and collaborate and come up with something better than you or I could have come up with on our own. And then surrounding these 6 habits, I say surrounding, I'm picturing the model in my mind, how we teach the 7 habits, but surrounding the 6 habits is habit number 7, called sharpen the saw. This is the habit of renewal. This is the habit that Naresh was just talking about, where we invest in ourselves, not because we're selfish, but because by investing in our body, our mind, our heart, and our spirit, we then have that much more capability and capacity to continue to do for others. So that was a Reader's Digest condensed version of the 7 habits of highly effective people.
Yeah, and I got to say, I try to implement all 7 habits, but there are obviously certain habits that resonate with each individual more than others. And I want to quickly just share and apply some of these habits. So like number 1 is about proactivity. And to me, this is a major reason why I personally, and I try to tell other people this, but you can't control. That's the entire point of habit number 1. It's basically being proactive yourself and not depending on things out of your control. So like right now during these crazy times, right, there are a lot of things that are out of our control, even when it comes to like politics and who your local politicians are, the president or whoever. That's out of your control. But the idea to me is you can still, this ties into habit number 7, which is you can invest in yourself and take control of your own situation without being dependent on things that are out of your control, and be proactive. And to me, it's surprising how many people disagree with these 2 habits, because they say, oh no, the president needs to be taking care of us, or, Congress needs to be taking care of us, or my doctor needs to be taking care of me, or, my spouse needs to be taking care of me, or my parents need to be. And I think this kind of mentality goes against the 7 habits of highly effective people. Now, number 2, you said have a plan. I think that's so important. Even if your plan may not be the greatest plan, I think it's important to mentally be prepared and be ready for whether it's starting a business and writing out, not a formal business plan, but having a set vision of how you're going to build the business, how you're going to hire people, and your monetization, revenue models. Having a plan is always better than no plan. And I've seen people who don't have plans. I mean, they don't know. It's like getting in a car and you're just driving around aimlessly. Number 3, doing. That's what I took away from it. It's, stop talking and actually do. Just go out and do what you say you're going to do, whether it's starting the business or working from home or being a good father, being a good husband. Do it. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to absolutely do it. And then, like you said, number 4, I took that to the takeaway was to think positively. And I think right now is a very negative time. And there are lots of people who are thinking negatively about the economy, about the job situation, about the virus and death and disease. There's just a lot of negative talk and just negative energy. And I feel like there's no science behind this, but thinking positively and being optimistic, I just feel has a certain energy that just protects you. I mean, like I said, that I don't have any scientific evidence that backs this up, but these would be kind of my quick kind of applications into today's world.
Well, it's a great summary. And with habit 1, being proactive, which is the first habit for a reason, it's foundational. One of the opposites of being proactive is to be a victim. And the examples you described, Naresh, are victim language. When I say, well, there's nothing we can do, or the president's this, or the disease is this, and I can't do anything about it. Well, you can make that a true statement, and then you can see how happy you are. But those people who say, okay, it is what it is, whether I agree, based on where I am in my politics or whatever, I can say, okay, well, we have the president, we have what can I do about it? Well, I can vote in the next election if I didn't last time, or I can. Yeah. There are always things that we can say, okay, well, we can't change this. What can we change? And I'll tell you, in work and in life, we are so much happier if we can take a proactive approach and not dwell on all of the things that we can't do, because we can both come up with lists of hundreds of things that we don't have influence over. But people are amazed once they start working within what we call their circle of influence versus just their circle of concern. They look at those things they can actually have an influence on, and it changes the whole course of their life. You mentioned in Habit 4, think when we're scientific data proving that the attitude with which we go into a situation can become part of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we go in doom and gloom and thinking this is never going to work, we will probably, all of our behaviors will work towards making that happen. But if we go in, and it can't just be an attitude, if I smile and I'm happy all day, everything's going to be perfect. No. But if we go in with this abundant mindset, we have a mindset of, how can we make this work? What can we contribute? Then that too becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where things work to our benefit.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about these, and one of the things I think in today's COVID environment is number 4 is critically important if you're going to be working from home and changing your scenario, because business owners need to be thinking, how can somebody working from home benefit the business and how can it benefit themselves? The employee needs to think, how can I continue to add value to the company even though I'm working from home and not in the office? What are your thoughts on right now, kind of which one is most helpful to employers and employees?
Which of the habits?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, my first answer is all of them. but then, Adam, let's start where you brought that thinking win-win. I had a situation in my company at FranklinCovey where one of our leaders said to me, well, I've got these people at home. It's in our accounts receivable department, and they do the collections. And he said, I just don't know. I just worry if they're working or are they just watching TV. And I said, well, now wait a minute. how do you measure their results? Do you measure their results by seeing them sitting at their desk or their cubicle? Or, well, no, it's based on how much, how far they are behind on their collections. And I said, okay, so if they're working from home and you see the volume of their collections stay the same or go up, then tell me what your concern is. Well, I just wonder if they're working at 8 or did they get up later? And again, it's a little bit of an old school thought. And I said, well, I think we need to decide on, are we going to be paying for results or are we paying for face time in the office? And I know many organizations with the pandemic here and everybody working from home are realizing they got to rethink, what am I paying for? And do we have mutual trust here? And in this particular scenario, it's just interesting. I'm sure you've seen it in the work that you're all doing with this work from home, but the productivity in this particular area has actually gone up. And who cares if somebody's deciding to work from, depending on their job, deciding to work hours at night versus what they were doing in the morning? We're paying for results. And people are feeling, while there's so many challenging things going along with this, being sequestered into your home and all of the quote unquote freedoms that we don't have, but there's been a lot of increase in productivity in many areas because people are feeling a little more balanced. Again, it's not across the board, but where I'm home with some of my family members, where I can maybe go to lunch with a friend that I wasn't able to do before because of the locations of our offices, where I can go out and water the plants in the middle of the day if a call ended early. So people that I'm talking with are feeling, along with the stress, they're feeling a little more balanced in certain situations and therefore becoming more effective. So think win-win is a big one. I think seek first to understand, then to be understood. Habit 5. We're going through, as you know better than anybody, we're going through a change like the world has never experienced before. And people are unsettled and they're uncertain, and many are dealing with horrific situations, loss of loved ones, loss of jobs. I think it's always a time to take time to understand people, but now more than ever. Somebody asked me the same question the other day, which of the 7 habits is most important? Again, they're all important, but I think seeking first to understand, then to be understood. The habit of empathy is needed now more than it ever was before. So sorry, I get a little passionate and I start rambling on. I apologize.
No problem. So I want to talk a little bit about the 30th anniversary edition of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that just came out. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because when the book was written, it was written, I guess you can say, for baby boomers. And now we can kind of make the assumption that the 30th anniversary edition has been updated to not just cater towards the baby boomers, but also the millennials. So what is different with this book, and what new, fresh insights does this book have for a new generation of leaders?
Yeah. So as you point out, it was written 30 years ago. I don't know that it was written for baby boomers, but it was written for the people at that time who were baby boomers. And the beauty of the book, and the reason why it has remained one of the best-selling business books of all time, is again, Stephen said, I did not invent the 7 habits. What I did was I identified those practices or those habits that were at work in people who seem to be most effective in life. We define effectiveness as getting results that you want today and in a way that allows you to get them over and over again in the future. That's why it wasn't called the 7 habits of highly successful people or highly efficient people, but truly effective, where you're climbing the ladder, so to speak, and your ladder is leaning against the right wall. It's getting you to where you want to be going. And so I would initially say, while the book was written 30 years ago, and its relevancy was absolutely relevant to the people and the baby boomers at that time, as I said up front, it is as relevant today as it was then, because these principles don't change. The principles of accountability, of prioritization, of diversity, of continuous improvement, of resourcefulness. What has changed in the book, we didn't change any of the habits because they're timeless. We didn't change any of the principles. What has changed is Sean Covey, Dr. Covey, one of Dr. Covey's sons, who's one of the presidents in our organization. He's gone in with each habit and added probably 2,000 words at the end of each habit to give examples of current situations where that habit is now at practice, so that people can read through the habit as it was originally written and then read through the practical application of that particular habit in today's world. So that's the big difference. Jim Collins wrote the foreword. Jim Collins, the best-selling author of Good to Great, wrote the foreword of the 7 Habits, and I want to get his wording correctly because it's really, really profound what he said here. He said, I'll bring it up so I get the wording right. Jim Collins said, prior to Apple and Microsoft, few people could harness computers to their daily lives. There was no easily accessible user interface. Similarly, there have been hundreds of years of accumulated wisdom about personal effectiveness, from Benjamin Franklin to Peter Drucker, but it was never assembled into one coherent, user-friendly framework. Stephen Covey created a standard operating system, if you will, or the Windows for personal effectiveness, and he made it easy to use. I just think that is a brilliant summary that Jim Collins wrote about why the 7 Habits continues to be the go-to book for so many of us to become more effective in both our personal and our professional lives.
Now, I think one of the things that I've seen society have the hardest terms grappling with at the moment is number 5, the seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Because you see the polarization of our country has people just kind of immediately saying, oh, well, that side thinks this, even though they don't really research it and they don't really know for sure. How can you help both yourself and the people around you, actually explore first to understand and then to be understood?
Well, Adam, I so appreciate you bringing this up. It is, I wouldn't say it's my favorite habit. They're all my favorite, but it is the habit that I could talk about for 5 days, not just because it's habit number 5. So empathy, true empathy, is not agreeing or disagreeing with another person. It's taking the time to suspend, and I love the use of that word because I'm not giving it up. I'm suspending my thoughts, my beliefs, my ideas long enough to really hear things how you hear them, to really see things how you see them. That's what empathy is. It's not sympathy. It's truly, as best as anyone can do, putting on the moccasins or the shoes of the other person. So how do you do that, to your question? Just as an example, we have, as I think many households do in the U.S. right now, we have very strong political feelings about our current government and our current president. And I won't share one way or the other, but what I will, and there are news channels that, of course, lean one way or the other as well. So while we have our preferred news channel, I've made it a point for the last couple of months to spend 20 minutes to a half hour every day of watching the news channel that is almost the opposite extreme of what I tend to favor. And I do that because I have some family members, I have some close friends, I have some colleagues. Well, I don't talk politics at work, but I have some colleagues who have strong feelings that are very opposite of mine. And I want to have an understanding of where they get their information, what they have, going into their mind, not so I can change their mind, but so I can at least appreciate why they have the point of view they have as the point of view. Seeking first to understand isn't, again, about getting someone to agree with you. It's about taking time to understand their point of view. And empathic communication is so simple that we make it difficult. All we need to do is reflect back to the person what we believe they're feeling and what they're saying. So in other words, an example of an empathic statement would be, my daughter, who I talked with last night and was upset about something and moved in with some roommates and they're not paying their fair share of the rent, and I told her that was going to happen and everything else. So as a parent, you're really tempted to say, I told you this was going to happen and now you're upset. That's not empathic, that's judgmental. An empathic statement would say, Drew, you seem frustrated about your situation, and then shut up, don't say anything else. And the person will say, well, I'm not really frustrated, but I wondered about this and this and this. And then you go on to say, boy, I bet that's concerning. You refrain from judging or advising or probing. You just listen. And you'll be amazed at what information people will start to share. And you'll have a much better understanding of where they're coming from, where you can then dive in and really start to, if asked, start to solve the problem. So I'm condensing, 2 days of Habit 5 teach into a couple of minutes here. But that's That's why it is so important. And especially right now, you've sensed it, I've sensed it, everybody's emotions are much higher than they were previous to this pandemic. Everybody's stressed about the various things they are. And so emotions, anger, sadness, happiness, everything's a little bit closer to the surface, which is why it is so needed to have people that will take the time to really understand where each of us is coming from.
Well, Todd, I've got to say, I think as far as a college, we're seeing education change a lot during this pandemic, and it's going to come out, that entire industry from kindergarten all the way through PhDs, really, really taking a transformation. And I think this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if someone skips a lot of their education, but if they read this book from cover to cover and spend time on it, think about it, take notes on it, I think the education that they'll get just from this book will be greater than really most formal training. And I say to tie this into kind of the current situation in the government. I mean, we've seen the government kind of step in and say, you must stay in your home. You must shut down. If you're not an essential business, you must shut down. If you go out, you must wear a face mask. I think the government would be very, very smart to make this book a required read for all citizens. I think our society, I think the unemployment situation, I think entrepreneurship, I think marriages and divorces, friendships, I think they will all improve if every single U.S. citizen read this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Well, I think we should hire you as the 7 Habits spokesperson. But I couldn't agree with you more. And I just say it from personal experience. As I mentioned, I've been with the organization for 25 years. I first read the book 27 years ago, so after 3 years after it was published. And I know it sounds dramatic, but it really was life-changing. And it continues, to your point, Naresh, it continues to change my life every day. Because these principles, you never perfect them. You never become... Even Dr. Covey said he never became perfect at any one of the 7 habits. It's a continuous journey. But in the process of making that journey, you become a better partner or husband or mother or father or sister or colleague or neighbor. You can't help but be better at all of the relationships in your life. And I think we realize always, but more now than ever before, that relationship, nothing trumps relationships.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that this book saves lives too. I mean, it's not just changing lives, but it saves lives. Mental health, even the financial impact, the health impact when it comes to exercising and getting your body moving. This is just, I mean, seriously, this is like a public policy solution for so many different areas. So I can't stress that enough. And I don't know if you guys at FranklinCovey, if you have like a lobbyist or a spokesperson who goes out and tries to lobby politically, but even just making it a required read in school. I mean, it's not in high school. The high schools are still teaching the Great Gatsby and all those kind of English not ancient, but English literature. This could be tied in, maybe not an English class, but some other type of civics class or developmental class.
No, it's a great thought. And as I mentioned, Sean Covey, who wrote the additional pieces to the back of each habit, Sean is the president of our education division. And so we have and have had for many years now something called the Leader in Me program. It's really wonderful. It's K through 12 right now. It takes the principles of the 7 habits into the elementary schools, teaching these young children at their core how to become leaders and how to develop integrity and character. And so we have what are called Leader in Me schools throughout the world now. They have to become a lighthouse school. They have to meet certain requirements, but they have embedded the 7 habits and the principles of the 7 habits into the education of these kids. So there's been a huge headway made in that area. We also do have a government division that works with. We have several large government contracts with different entities of the government. So not as much as we hope to be, but we're making some headway in those areas as well, Naresh.
Now, you co-authored the book Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, The 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. And one of the things that you address in the FranklinCovey, according to your website, is the unconscious bias. And there's a lot of kind of debate right now about, how much unconscious bias people have, what all it entails. Can you talk a little bit about how addressing your unconscious bias can make you a better leader?
You bet. So those are actually two different books. I've been privileged in my years at FranklinCovey to author a couple of books. There was a first book that is a Wall Street Journal bestseller that I authored by myself called Get Better, 15 Proven Practices to Build Effective Relationships at Work. And that was all about a lot about what we've been talking about, and how, as the chief people officer for many years, I've seen the principles from our content at work and relationships. The second book you mentioned, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, The 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. I was fortunate to co-author that with Scott Miller and Victoria Roos-Olson. And then a new book that is being released in October is called Unconscious Bias. And Pamela Fuller and 2 other co-authors are authoring that book. But let me just talk about these 2 books you bring up, 6 Critical Practices and Unconscious Bias. So the 6 critical practices, there are many things that great leaders do. But there are 6 things that they do on a consistent basis that have them rise above a good leader or a mediocre leader. Those 6 practices very quickly are the mindset which they have. You've got to develop a leader's mindset. You're shifting from an individual performer to one where you're getting results with and through others. You've got to have regular one-on-ones. It sounds so fundamental, but this is what great leaders do. They meet frequently and often with their team members to understand them as whole people and not just as one of the cogs in their team. How to set up their team to get results is all about making sure that people understand the mission of the company and what their piece of that mission is, why they're doing what they do. Creating a culture of feedback is practice number 4. That is where a great leader makes it safe and frequent for everyone on the team, including the leader, to be giving and receiving feedback and assuming good intent so that we're all trying to help each other get better. Leading your team through change is practice number 5. Of course, change is unprecedented right now, but how does a leader successfully lead their team through change? They don't have to have all the answers, but they do have to be out in front of the change. And then practice number 6 is managing your time and your energy, the importance of investing in yourself, because what the leader values gets valued. So those are the 6 critical practices for Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. Unconscious bias is all about the bias that we all have. And the first person that says, well, I don't have any bias, they probably have more bias than anybody, because we all have bias. It's how we make decisions. And so bias can be a good thing. Bias isn't always a bad thing. It's how we put 2 and 2 together in our mind, and we can quickly make these mental decisions. But the unconscious bias that we have, the book starts out with this phenomenal case study of I think it was the Philharmonic Orchestra, and they were trying to figure out why men in the orchestra were making more money than women. Well, they found out that men were sitting in the first chairs. In the orchestra, I'm not an expert in this, but when you sit first chair, second chair, or third chair, the better clarinet player, the better violin player, they sit in the first chair, and those chairs pay more money than the third chair. Well, then they started to figure out, well, why are there more men in those chairs? Men aren't necessarily better instrument players than women, so they decided to have blind auditions to see if they were unintentionally putting men in those first chairs. So they had everybody audition behind a curtain. Have you heard about this study?
I haven't, but it sounds like The Voice.
A little bit like The Voice. So this is fascinating, though. They did these blind auditions, and they'll be darned if it still didn't end up that these men, more men than women, ended up in these first chairs, so therefore making more money. Then someone got wise and no one was doing this intentionally. They realized that until they had everyone take off their shoes, as these people were walking in behind the curtain, it was an unintentional thing, but in the backs of some people's minds, they would hear the click or the sound that a high heel makes, a woman's shoe versus a man's shoe, and their subconscious, they were still rating the men higher than the women. As they did this blind audition without shoes, all of a sudden there was this more equitable distribution of men and women. Sorry for the long story. We all have bias. We don't mean to have bias that hurts. We don't mean to have bias. Most of us don't mean to have bias that hurts, but we have that bias. And so we have to identify that bias. We have to cultivate and learn why we have that bias, why we're doing it. And then we have to have the courage to speak up and say, you know what, I've been doing this, or you've been doing this. It's been unintentional. What are we going to do about it? So it's a fascinating read. It is, as you can imagine, it is certainly in our current times, it has taken off. The pre-sales have exceeded all of the publishers' expectations, but it's relevant and needed now more than ever before.
Well, what would be your tips, Todd, as far as business owners helping their companies thrive in the age of digital and remote work?
I think connection has always been important, more important now than ever before. You mentioned it up front in one of your examples. We're lonely. I mean, it is, people, I think, that haven't worked from home before have thought, oh, that'd be a dream job. I'd kind of set my own schedule and whatever. And there are some benefits to that. But at the end of the day, I think we're hungered and starved for interaction with others. So I think as leaders, you got to realize that we're not going to change the current pandemic situation anytime soon, it sounds like. But because you're recognizing that people are lonely, maybe you increase the number of team meetings every week over Zoom. Maybe you do a lot more phone calls than you've done in the past. Just connection in general, I think, is one of the most important things. Things you can do to involve your team members remotely are really critical. I think it's important to increase the level of trust you have right now. The example I gave earlier, it's not a time to shame people or make people feel like you don't trust them because you can't see them and they're working from home. So decide what it is you measure, decide what it is you pay for. We pay for results. How do you measure those results? Make sure people are clear on the results you expect, but not on the, I want to know that you're sitting at your desk from 8 to 5. But I want to make sure that you're clear on the results we need and that you're feeling connected to the team. So those would be the first couple of things that come to mind.
Great. Well, that's Todd Davis. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer of FranklinCovey and Wall Street Journal bestselling co-author of Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team, in the 30th anniversary edition of the infamous, timeless classic, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Just came out. It's in all the, I guess, digital bookstores, since most of the brick and mortar bookstores are either closed or shut down. So get it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. And Todd Davis, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners about anything we've talked about, whether it's your book, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, or 7 Habits?
Thank you. I would say 2 things. One is a quote from Dr. Covey. He used to say, with people, fast is slow. And what he meant by that was we're the world in general, we're always in such a hurry. We're always trying to get more done and get more accomplished. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But with people, fast is slow. Slow down. When you try to be efficient and fast with people, you actually you're not as successful, you're not as effective. So with people, with relationships, slow down. Take the time to really appreciate, understand each other, be there for each other, support one another. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, someone asked me in an interview yesterday, it was a clever question. Oh, if I had a bumper sticker on my car, what would I want the bumper sticker to say? And I thought of a bumper sticker that's been around for a long time. It was on the back. I saw it the other day. It was on the back of a motorhome that was pulling some jet skis or something like that. And the bumper sticker, I'm sure you've all seen it, said, he or she who dies with the most toys wins. And I chuckled when I saw that. And I thought, I would say the person who dies with the most effective relationships wins. So my closing thought would be, nothing is more important than relationships. And I think if the world and every one of us in it could wake up every morning remembering that and really investing in and taking time for meaningful relationships, we would all help shape the world to be a much better place.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. So Todd Davis, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. We really, really appreciate you. And your website, check him out, FranklinCovey.com, FranklinCovey.com, for all the great things that FranklinCovey does. Again, Todd Davis is the Executive VP and CPO, that's Chief People Officer at FranklinCovey. And for all our listeners out there, visit our website. That's the workfromhomeshow.com, workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. We got some other free things. You can catch all of our previous episodes there as well. And until next time, keep on working from home.